Hello, everyone, and welcome to this webinar for Pride. My name is Paul Ferguson, and I am the Organisational Development Manager within West College, Scotland. And I'm delighted to have a panel with me today to talk about all things Pride, and I will let them introduce themselves in a moment. This webinar on all of our social media is in order to celebrate Pride. We've been doing lots of different activities within the college for LGBTQIA+ awareness, and one of the things that we're going to be doing is going to the Pride March in Glasgow on Saturday. This webinar is in order just to talk about all things LGBTQIA+, and hopefully that you will enjoy the discussion that I have with the panel today. I'm going to go to Ian first, and Ian will introduce himself.
Thanks, Paul. I'm Ian Forster-Smith, Assistant Principal for Student Life and Skills at the college, and my pronouns are he, him.
Thanks, Ian. And Kyle?
I'm Kyle Prettle, and I'm a modern apprentice science technician at the college, and my pronouns are also he, him.
Thanks, Kyle. My pronouns are also he, him, so there's a bit of a theme on the panel today. I am part of the LGBTQIA community. I identify as either a gay man or a queer man. I use the term interchangeably. Ian, are you part of the community?
Yes, I am, Paul, and I identify as a gay man.
Thank you. And Kyle?
I am indeed, and I either identify as a bisexual or queer man and a trans man.
Thanks, Kyle. So well represented on the panel today, but what our audience will notice is that we don't have any female representation on the panel, and that isn't by lack of trying. We did ask for female representation to be part of our panel today, but it got me thinking that actually when you look at mainstream media, TV, film, there isn't a big representation of females. We do have gay males and we do have trans, both men and women. Ian, why do you think that is? Why do you think there isn't that female representation in the media or in events like this?
It's a really interesting question, Paul. I think partly it's around representation from the very early days of LGBTQ, I'm going to say plus rather than adding in all the, because it gets too long, representation that has been very male dominated, I think, throughout the decades of activity through Pride. So I think there is probably lack of understanding that of the female aspect of in the gay community. But females do exist in the gay community and are active members of the gay community, and I would do anything to support more proactive, positive promotion of gay women within our community. But if you look even at role models on social media or on the TV, there's very few gay women that would appear in a soap opera or in films, and there's very few gay female-related films that are focused. You know, we've had Queer as Focus, a TV drama that was very male-dominated focused. You've had rephrase that one, please. Brokeback Mountain, where it was another very male-dominated film, but those sort of high-hitting programs have never been female-dominated. The only real program in my years has been the L Word, which came and went in the 90s, and there hasn't been anything really since then.
Thanks, Ian. Kyle, what would you add?
I'd completely agree with what Ian said as well. It's almost like people forget that they are a part of it, and not only that they're a part of it, but that they had an active part in creating Pride in the first place. You know, like it was trans women that helped us get to where we are. It was a woman that designed our flag. Like it was women that were extremely, extremely proactive in giving us the sort of pride that we have today. And it's just weird to think that that has been completely forgotten about. I think there's a whole generation of the community that go to Pride and don't completely get why we're marching. I think, you know, they forget that part of it. But in terms of the representation, even the small representation you do have of lesbians or any sort of women in the media is, number one, bisexual women just don't exist. And if they are lesbians, they tend to be hypersexualized or typically attractive and feminine. You don't see a lot of butch lesbians or, just real life relationships portrayed online. Even the trans representation we see, it's always the sort of same narrative that's going on, whether it's a trans woman or a trans man. They're always angry, they're always bullied, they're always the outcast, they always hate everyone and themselves. And it's, I think we need to break away from that. And I think people forget there's a lot to celebrate about being queer. And that I think should be more of a focus.
Yeah, absolutely. And so just coming to that, celebration, Kyle, what does Pride mean for you and part of that celebration?
A big part of Pride to me is still a protest. I still sadly feel like I have to go out into the streets and fight to exist. And I don't think I'm ever going to get away from that part of it. But on the other hand, it's just a time for a complete, just a genuine celebration of your true, authentic self and being able to even just maybe for that one day, depending on, your circumstances, just having that day to be completely open and to live your truth. There's something, just really heartwarming about it. And, it's that self-celebration that isn't there enough, I think.
And
Ian, what does Pride mean for you?
Yeah, I think the word celebration that Kyle mentioned there is really what I think Pride is around. I know people from the LGBTQ plus community of all ages, and those people that fought for the rights, the hard-won rights that we have today. But we know there's still a journey to go on. It's a celebration of that hard work that they've put in to give us the opportunity to live the life that we can live now today. I think it also, for me, provides a wee sense of hope and a reminder of what a great community our community is. It's full of amazing people that have done amazing things and do everyday normal things to actually strive to support other people or the issues that we all face being a member of the community. But I think it's also sort of a huge celebration of what diversity is and celebration of humanity, because at the end of the day, that's what it's about, isn't it? It's being part of a human community and being who we are. So yeah.
Yeah, so I have got something to admit, and I think this is the right space in order to do that. Is on Saturday that will be my first time ever attending Pride, and there's a few reasons for that, and one of them is that I've I've been very, very lucky to never had any adversity because of who I am in my life. So I've been very lucky to be part of organisations where I've always felt as if I could be my authentic self. I've always been accepted in my family and my friends, and I've never had that I know that so many other members of our community have had. So the need to go to Pride has never been there for me. And when I look at Pride, or when I've looked at Pride from the outside, it's always been, why are we playing up to all those stereotypes that we've fought so hard to get away from? And that's why another reason why I've never gone. However, this year, my reason for attending is because in the last couple of years, my husband has been working in hospitality because of the pandemic, and he has received a lot of homophobic abuse from customers and also from colleagues, which was the most surprising thing that I've ever come across. And so that really was an eye opener for me in saying, actually, there's still work to be done here. I can now see that, by my attending Pride, it not necessarily for myself, but maybe for others who have not had that, and being an example for others. And so that's what Pride means to me now, is actually being that example for others and allowing people to be able to see, actually, you can be your authentic self in the workplace, you can be your authentic self in my friendship circle, in my family, wherever that is, then I want you to be yourself. And that's what Pride is going to mean for me. That kind of leads me nicely on to, well, there are people who say we don't need Pride anymore. Well, you've got equal rights, you've got marriage, you've got this, you've got that. Why are you still marching in the streets? Kyle, do you want to talk a little bit about that?
For one of the very just plain and simple obvious reasons is that we are still being attacked and murdered to this day for the simple reason that we exist. There's still at least 49 countries that punish homosexual acts with life in prison. There's 11 countries that still use the death penalty to punish homosexuality. Even in the UK, I'm sure you have probably both heard about the government banning conversion therapy for gay, lesbian, and bisexual people, but not for trans people. Um, Still don't obviously know what's going on with that. But I can't see how you can sit and say that we have equal rights when there's a whole host of people that are still being forced to go through things like that. You've still got kids in school being bullied by their peers, sometimes even by their teachers. And this is, this is primary school, high school, probably colleges, universities. It happens everywhere to this day. There's even older generations. I've read reports on older queer people being terrified of ending up with Alzheimer's or dementia and being accidentally outing themselves. There's we people don't realize that there's still so many people out there that look to take advantage of the community, and that's what we can't sit back and like. We're not done with Pride until all of that is done, and it doesn't exist, and it just full stop. It just does not happen. Even online as well, you've got people that use their influence and their fame and their followers online to spread hate as well, and all that does is feed into the hate, and it makes everyone, it continues to make people look like idiots. And sadly, because of all this stuff that I see online, anytime I begin to talk about trans issues, I now feel like I just annoy people, or that I do it too much, or that I don't actually need to speak about this, so I should just be quiet. And that's not the case, because this is my life and I need to speak about these things. These things affect me. These things, it's things that I go through, and I should have the ability to openly talk about these things without the fear of, anything happening to me in the end. But right now, I don't have that safety. And
Yeah.
to me, that's why I think we still need Pride.
Ian, what would you say to somebody who said, "Oh, you don't need Pride anymore," or "Why isn't there a straight Pride?" What would you say to people like that?
I think it's, unless you've been marginalised or bullied or put in a situation that makes you feel so uncomfortable at being who you are, I think it's hard to understand what Pride really symbolises. This will be my 26th Pride that I've been to in my life, and for me, Pride still symbolises that continued need that we need to fight for equality and inclusion in the communities that we live, because it still does exist. I've been bullied as a young person where I ended up wanting to take my own life, which is difficult. I've been asked in previous employment not to tell people that I'm gay because it might affect the way that people want to work with me. I've been attacked in the street for being a gay man. So I think, there are still a lot of work to be done out there to actually bring people to actually accept people for who they are and not make unnecessary judgment or bias against us. I would say that LGBTQ plus rights are still quite precarious in the environment we live in now. And Pride shows those communities that we live in that we need their continued support, and they need to celebrate with us who we are as a community and continue to support us that way. So Pride really it's a marked journey that still needs to continue, because we're still not there in that acceptance and equality part.
Thanks, Ian, and thanks for that honesty, talking about your own journey. See, looking at your career journey, Ian, is it really a passage of time that's allowed you to be your authentic self in a workplace, or is there or are there particular workplaces that allow you to do that, or is it a bit of both?
I think it's an element of both. I mean, I studied environmental science at university, and in those days it was a brand new subject. It was an unknown subject, so I guess it's part of me being a bit of not a trailblazer, I don't want to say that, but somebody that took brave steps. So I took a brave step to do a course that no one had ever done before back in the early 90s, and then I worked in a various of different industries. I've not always been in education, so I worked in environmental waste management, and that was the environment where I was told I had to keep my life to myself. And then I moved on from there, and I can talk about that later if you want, but I moved on there to work in London, big city, and worked in intellectual property, and I worked with some of the most international global brands you could possibly imagine. So the prejudice in those larger organisations is much smaller, so you don't come across the same issues. So I found when you work for a small organisation, it's harder sometimes to be who you are. And then I moved into working social science research and policy work at University of Sussex after I worked in intellectual property. And I think the education sector is a very open and honest environment. Actually, you have probably less prejudice and less issues with your employers as you work through those. So I've been in education ever since then. So that was 2006. So I've worked in various different roles there, head of operations for policy research, program manager for university restructure, worked in cancer sciences, medicine, dentistry and nursing at University of Glasgow, engineering down at the University of Bath, and then I've been here at West College, Scotland since 2017, so 5 years. But I do think education's a much more accepting and open environment, but we do a lot of work, I think, within education, looking at bias and people's lack of understanding of bias and training and stuff like that. So it's a bit of both, I guess, Paul, dependent on which journey you work in. But I also worked in hospitality, and I didn't experience any prejudice in hospitality, but I can understand what your husband has experienced because everyone's different and there are different aspects there, isn't there? So,
If I can just, like take you were talking about education being, open and transparent. Do you think that's because of the focus on the students and the customers at the end of the day, and that, making sure that we are doing everything we can to be inclusive of them? Do you think that has a knock-on effect then for the staff who are part of that organisation?
I think it has part of it, but I think also we've got national legislation that we have to work to. So I think that also influences the way that we operate. I think within our own institution, we probably don't have a great sense of what the LGBTQ plus community is in the student, let alone the staff population within the college. So I think we do have a lot of work there to do to understand that. And actually, I know our Students' Association is really keen as one of their agendas moving forward. I would probably edge on the side that it's the policy that makes us the way we are more rather than actually respecting the community that we've got.
Yeah, no, that's a really good point. Kyle, you and I had a conversation a couple of weeks ago about a voluntary organisation. Now, we won't talk about what organisation that is, but we said that actually the passage of time has really helped that organisation in terms of its inclusivity, because you said your experience of that being younger was that it wasn't inclusive, and my experience of it now was that it was very inclusive, and I think that is by passage of time. Do you think passage of time, even in your lifetime, can you see big differences just because of time?
I want to be able to say yes, I'm not going to lie, I want to, but sadly I've not had the complete best, experiences. And obviously with that particular organisation, yes, they have came leaps and bounds, and it is great to see, because the last thing I wanted to do was leave. It was something I enjoyed, it was something I had fun in, I had friends in, but because of the way that they were around my gender identity, I had to leave. Same with school. It was actually the teachers that bullied me. It was the teachers that made sure that I wouldn't be called Kyle, or no one would use he, him pronouns for me. And over the years, anyone that I knew that was in the school, or it was all the same stories. It was the same teachers, and nothing had really changed. And, there was a new head teacher, and things, maybe changed here and there, but there's still not been much actually done in order to change the way that they do anything for queer people, or the way they act or treat them, or like bullying. Still, they just get away with it. It's still, it feels like it is just the same for me, and for what I've experienced in workplaces as well. I've been denied jobs. Like, I've completely, had a great interview, been told whatever, and all of a sudden the documents come out and the names don't seem to match up, and there's all the palaver, and all of a sudden they don't phone you back and you don't have a job anymore. And it was, and it's something that I struggled with until I ended up with the job in the college. It's sort of the only first place, job wise, that I felt any sort of secure or safety around the way I identify. Even in a workplace that did have legislations in place and had all these rules and whatever, even when I reported people, I was the one that, ended up losing my job in the end, and I was the one that was left, struggling. Everyone else gets away with it, and I'm left with nothing. But sadly, that still seems to be the way I've been experiencing things so far.
Do you think, Kyle, that it's a lot to do with leadership and role models within an organisation that shape that? Because, like you've just said, you can have all the policies and procedures and strategies in the world, but unless there's actually someone who is at the forefront of that, then maybe those aren't enacted. Would you agree with that?
Oh yeah, 100%.
Yeah. Has that been your experience, Ian, that it's all about the role models and the leaders and the people within that organisation that make it?
Absolutely. I mean, leadership's key, isn't it? Or role models, and leadership's in so many different forms and shapes as well, isn't it? It's not just the person at the top; it's everybody that you engage with. So, I know, like the team that Kyle works with, they're a great team, aren't they, Kyle? So they'll lead you in a different way on your pathway through your apprenticeship and stuff like that. So I think it's the informative part of leadership that really does help develop and create the community that you'd want within your own organisation. And
I think
it's pleasing to hear, Carol, that at our college that this is an employer that you feel you have been able to be yourself and actually be recognised for you and not had any form of prejudice, which is fantastic to hear. But it's also sad to hear that the education system within schools hasn't moved much further forward from 1988 when I started secondary school. So that does sadden me a lot to hear that, but I understand what you were saying.
I also want to just add another thing there about when we were talking about role models and leadership and stuff like that. I get asked a lot, quite a lot actually, why I always identify as a trans man and not just a man. And it's for that exact reason, is that if I am always out and I'm always open about being a trans man, that means anyone else that knows me or knows of me or anything like that, hopefully, if they're struggling or if they don't know who to turn to or if they have no one else that they can turn to, they know at least there's one person that they can talk to. There's one person that might be able to understand and lead them and guide them or something. It's not just about, like, I always hear the phrase, but you want to be a man, so why do you not identify as a man? And number one, I don't want to be a man, I am a man. And number two, if I do, just in the trans community, we call it going stealth. And if I do choose to go stealth, then no one knows. They just see me as another probably straight cis man out there walking about, and that's not what I want. I want people to have someone because I didn't have that someone.
I think that's fantastic, Kyle, and I think that if you can be that role model for another trans person, trans man or trans woman, actually, the fact that you are being that for them and showing, I can do this, so can you, and you can mentor them through their journey. You've lived it, you're still living it, and living that challenge and that adversity. So if you can be that for them, then I think that's really special. I found out that I was that for someone accidentally. I was leaving my previous employment, and I was at a night out, and someone came up to me who was bisexual, and he said, he said, I can't believe that you're going because you've allowed me to be myself. And I was like, what are you talking about? It's like, well, when I joined the organisation, here was a guy who was himself, what didn't hide the fact that he was gay, that he was married to a man, that he was just naturally himself. He said, in me coming into the organisation, I could see that and go, well, if he can be himself, then I can be myself too. And I was really taken aback by that because I never ever set out to do that. But the fact I was able to do that for someone else was fantastic. And I think that that's one way that we can overcome that prejudice, that bias that we've talked about, is the more people are just being themselves and being themselves, not just for themselves but for others as well, then that's really helpful. Ian, can I come back to you in terms of the prejudice that you've experienced at different parts in your career? How did you overcome that challenge? And you know, in the face of adversity, what advice would you give to others who are experiencing that?
Well, my first experience was back in 1998, 99, when I was asked by my employer at the time not to tell people that I was gay because he thought it would affect the team that I worked with. So I line managed a team of lorry drivers, a very male-dominated environment, and I was told that it wouldn't be taken kindly having a gay man being their boss, and that I should keep that to myself. I struggled with that because I was really young. I was fresh out of university. I didn't really know how to manage that myself. It was a small company. And the tipping point came, I went to a work event and they'd arranged a female stripper for me. And that I felt totally violated being put through something like that when they knew that would make me feel the most uncomfortable I could possibly feel. I probably didn't deal with it the right way, but I did speak to my mum and she said, you've got options. And said, your option is to leave or your option is to fight. She says, but for you, I think you should leave and get yourself another job. And that's how I dealt with that horrible situation. I thought, actually, no, I'll leave. And I did leave and I got a job the next week. That's how I ended up in London, because actually I wasn't going to change the culture of that organisation, me and my own. And it wasn't my fight to do that. So you have to, I think, through the journey, understand where you can influence and where you can't influence. That wasn't the right organisation for me, Paul. So I had to make the conscious decision to leave there and work for a more progressive organisation, which I did go to. And I haven't faced anything like that again in the workplace since then, which is pleasing to hear. But that was a very awkward and difficult, and I did feel violated by what they tried to do to me, which was very unpleasant. So.
Yeah, that's horrible. And I would even imagine that there would be some straight men who would be uncomfortable in that situation as well. So even just that environment just sounded toxic, Ian. And I think that you're absolutely right. There are some times where you go, and you know, and my mum, her advice always is choose your battles. And I think that is that one where, you know, do you fight that one or do you just get yourself out of the situation? And I personally, I think I would have done the same and just get myself out of the situation, because you've got to look after your own mental well-being as well. Because there's you know, picking someone up and saying no, that's not quite right, and then there's having to change a whole culture, which, like you said, Ian, you can't do on your own. Kyle, in terms of that kind of challenging cultures or challenging bias, how can we challenge bias?
That's a good question. You know, something I've been trying to figure out for a good few years now. I feel like there's a lot of really simple ways that people always miss out on, though, and that's the sort of bias towards heteronormative language. It's even simple things like referring to whoever you're with as your partner can often make someone around you feel a bit more comfortable to then open up and tell you something about, you know, their relationship. Because I personally know a lot of queer people who aren't, say, out to certain people, but you know, they have a partner and they want to speak about them and tell people what they got up to with them, and they sort of feel like there's no safe way to do that without obviously outing themselves. But it also feels like if you use the term partner right now, it also feels like you are in a way outing yourself, because not everyone uses it, and it does seem like it's mainly the queer community that use it, and it's about sort of normalizing that language. And you know, even simply like if you talk to someone, it tends to be like if you speak to a male, you'll end up saying something like, "Oh, have you got a girlfriend?" It's never, "Oh, have you got a boyfriend?" Or vice versa for a female. Even just simply automatically assuming that you're speaking to a male or female, especially right now, almost completely ignore and forget about non-binary people existing. There's a whole host of people that, won't want to be referred to as either of those, and no one seems to really accommodate to that. There's just, it feels like there should be a lot of really simple, easy things that could just be implemented so easily, and it just doesn't seem to happen. But again, it's about how do we get that to happen? That it just I always thought that, the more people you get doing it, obviously it eventually becomes a bit mainstream. And I think we can sort of see that happening online a bit right now with pronouns. Whether you're part of the trans community or not, a lot of people have their pronouns, say in social media account bios and things like that. And it limits people going on and automatically assuming, oh, this is a trans person, or, things like that. Yeah.
The thing about pronouns that I found is it allows people who maybe are not the kind of traditional pronouns or not the pronouns that you would expect. It allows them that freedom to go, oh, okay, we do this. It's not that you're then different from everyone. So if you put they, them in your email signature, for example, then that's not, oh, why are they doing that? It just becomes part of normal practice that whether you are she, her, he, him, or they, them, or any other makeup of that's okay to do that. And it's good that a lot of social media platforms, like you say, Kyle, have actually started making that part of what they do. Is, what are your pronouns? There's an organisation that I work with. It's a voluntary organisation, and at induction we ask people, what are your pronouns? It's part of, it just becomes part of that kind of natural view of that relationship. Ian, anything that you would add to anything that Kyle said there?
I think for me, bias, it's important, I think, just for me first to recognise that no matter how good a person you are, that everyone has an element of bias within themselves, and whether they like that or not. So there's that element of not being over judgmental, but then actually what you do to help that person with their bias. And I always say don't fight, because that's not the right thing. It's about educating, discussing, being open, and not judging those people with whatever bias it may be. And it's also respecting the fight that our peers have gone through before us to help us be the community that we are today. So fighting it or being very argumentative about isn't the answer. And I'm not a fighter. I'm more, let's discuss it and work out why you think that. So I think open discussions, educating people, understanding the why, and then saying, well, so what comes next? So I think it's just working with bias, but I think a good person recognises that they're biased themselves first before you then judge somebody else for their bias second. That would always be my advice to anybody.
Yeah, great advice. So just kind of sticking with that then, I think some bias tends to come from stereotypes. And I know that we've already talked about TV media. We started talking about that, and I think a lot of those stereotypes come from that. That the only kind of gay man is a camp gay man in a comedy. The only kind of woman is a very masculine, woman who's a lesbian. That those stereotypes are always the ones that you see in media. Again, how do we challenge those stereotypes? That's not all that there is. Kyle, any thoughts?
You need to talk to queer people and literally get it from first hand. Half the time, it tends to be straight cis people sitting trying to imagine what it would be like, or what the life as a queer person is like. And there's literally hundreds of thousands of millions of us out there ready to tell you exactly what it's like. We've been shouting at you for years of what it's like, and you still miss the mark. Like, it's like you said, it's always the exact same thing you see, but there's a whole host within every single, every letter that exists in our little acronym army. Like, not only have you got what that letter stands for, but you've got so many terms within it that people will identify more with. Like, I feel like people tend to assume that, for example, the trans community, if you're a trans man, you need to be this hyper masculine man, and if you're a trans woman, you need to be hyper feminine, and that's not how it is. I'm not exactly the best example because I do tend to prefer more masculine things, and that is just the way I am, and that's the way I identify. But I know a whole host of trans men that will happily shove on a dress and paint their nails and go out, and they still identify as a man. That doesn't change. But you need to realize that we're not just black and white, and we are literally the complete opposite. We're a rainbow. We're the most diverse like group that you could find, and it's not hard to simply ask and get the right information to make it possible. There is a few shows out there that exist that they do that. They work with the community, or they have members of the community actively working on it, producing it, starring in it, and they work. And it's just about getting more of that inclusivity within the industry.
The acronym ARMY, I'm going to steal that, Kyle. I've never heard that phrase before, but consider that well and truly stolen. Ian, negating those kind of negative stereotypes of the acronym ARMY, how do we do it?
Yeah, well, I think first of all, on reflection, I think people really love to compartmentalize everything in life. So I think there's an element of acceptance that is the nature of a human being, is probably number one. I think number two, that you must always focus on the positive and not focus on the negative. So you got to believe somebody's coming from good intentions first and stop making your own, maybe bias or automatic assumptions in someone. The other bit, I guess, is understanding that we're all different. Put yourself in that person's shoes, but like, try and think where they're coming from. And then back to your earlier point, just sort of educating people, asking the why and then the so what question. I think they're just really key parts of, I think, being the age I am now, that I've seen so many horrible things happen to people, but it's actually, if you're not happy with something, just call it out, say how you see it, call it out and say how you see it, and don't be afraid to do that, because actually I've got very few filters. If you know me well, I've got very few filters, and sometimes that gets me into trouble. But you know, that I think being as honest to yourself as possible helps break down those stereotypes. There's elements of me that you can stereotype into what a gay man should be. There's elements of me that you can't. But call it out if you're not happy. Just say that's not right, and be true to yourself.
Yeah, I think that's really, really important, because actually, if you look at some of the representations, you know, we've all watched it and we've all laughed at it, in terms of, you know, whether it's a Will and Grace, you know, you get,
Or
you know,
gimme.
yeah, you know, all of these great, and actually, if you look at it another way, they're celebrations of what it means to be part of the LGBTQ plus community. So yes, in a lot of ways they are stereotypes, but especially if they're at a moment in time. Will and Grace was very much a moment in time, and more modern things have tried to expand on what that means. But I think you're right, Ian. I think that, you know, you have to take it for what it is, a celebration. And if you personally are offended, or it's not working for you, then call that out in the best way that you possibly can. And back to that challenging of the bias. Yeah, we could talk all day about representations in TV, film, and the media, though, can't we? Ian, can I take you back to one of the things that you were saying earlier about, you know, we as a college, and, you know, there's still more that we can do for our employees, but then also for our students. Can you talk a bit more about how you foster that within a workplace?
Yeah, I'll try to. But I think one of it is about looking at the culture and the climate of where you work and what are the values of that organisation. Is it an honest and transparent place? Do we live and breathe the values and behaviours of that organisation? Where is it? I think even simple things like how you manage your daily work. So do we do sensible things like giving everybody the opportunity in a meeting? Do we create an agenda so everyone has the opportunity to contribute? Do we look at who's the facilitator or the chair of that meeting? I could list more and more. Like, do we rotate the chair and stuff like that? How do we make everyone feel included in activity within the organisation you work? I think we mustn't forget, like we've already talked about earlier, that everyone still has a bias. So we have to recognise the fact that bias exists, and utopia is not a reality in life. So you have to have that element of balance. And we talked about it earlier, so it's the involvement of both the student and the staff community in what makes an inclusive workplace, and probably that's something we can work on more and more as an organisation. And education is one of the best places to do that, because we've got both sides of the coin there, haven't we, with staff and students. And I think the other part is building senior management inclusion. I've worked somewhere where the EDI committee, so the Equality, Diversity and Inclusion Committee, the main objective of the person chairing that meeting was to get through the agenda as quickly as possible. That's not what that agenda's for. That agenda's there to have robust conversations and make positive actions for moving forward. Whether you're focusing on gender-based violence, whether you're focusing on LGBTQ plus community aspects, it's about making sure the appropriate discussions have happened and the appropriate action is then taken. And then that feeds into how we've got like policies and processes and practices in place. And then I've said it 1,000 times, it's a so what factor. So you've got them all in place. So what's the value of them? What do they bring to the community that you're supporting? So I guess if I rambled on there, but hopefully that answers the question, Paul.
No, definitely. And Kyle, you've obviously been in organisations more recently where that culture of inclusion wasn't fostered. How can you see or what is the so what that Ian was talking about of inclusion in the workplace?
Because personally for me, it's because I'm the one that always ends up losing out. It's never the person that did it or said it or whatever. It's always me. I'm always the one that either leaves the workplace or has to change the way I am to suit people. And it's that we need to get
Is that
rid
back
of,
to the
because
is that back to the culture then that Ian was talking about? It's the
yeah,
culture of the organisation. Okay.
I think as well what Ian was saying about having more inclusion even within the senior managements of any organisation, because I feel like depending on the organisation, not all of them listen to the people below. And even when they do, they won't always do exactly what you need, but it'll be some sort of variation of it. But whereas if you've got those people already at the top representing you or able to make those changes or make those policies, then that's how things can start to change and become more inclusive throughout the entirety of workplaces.
That's funny. It's almost as if we've come full circle, that idea of role models and leadership and that sort of thing that's within an organisation. So that we need that in our day-to-day lives, but we need that within our workplaces and in our organisations as well. In terms of that kind of that role model, what do you look for in an LGBTQIA plus role model, Kyle?
That's something I've never thought of.
Do you have any?
It's also a good question. I feel like, yes, there's definitely have been people that I have looked to, but to name them, I have no idea. But I don't think there was anything in particular that I looked out for. I think it was just more the fact that I saw someone that was like me, that was doing something and making me realize that I can have that life as this person. I don't need to change who I am. I don't need to hide that I'm trans. I don't need to hide that I'm queer. I don't need to do anything except for be myself. And I think that's the main thing that I always just appreciate about anyone that's out there and open and living their most authentic true life, is it's always that way of, well, if they can do it, why can't I? And I can. But I think it was definitely, thanks to being able to see people like that, that's made me more feel like this and be able to do this now.
Ian, have you had LGBTQ plus role models over the years?
I think from peer to peer rather than anybody that's famous. But I think thinking back to when I probably wasn't an out gay man, and about the negativity that was around being gay. So the whole AIDS pandemic in the 80s, and I was a teenager at the end of that part of my life. Margaret Thatcher's ability to control education and what was taught in schools and wasn't taught in schools put a lot of pressure on people of my generation about coming out as a gay man or a member of the LGBTQ plus community. So you saw between your peers that support, if that makes sense, because there wasn't that many out and open. You look at many of the famous actors now that have come out as being gay men. They weren't out then. When I was a young man, there was no one there to actually look at. I think the power of social media and TV broadcasting and all of that really has brought along much more positive role models. But I know we talked about every single role model is represented well, but I think there are role models out there which didn't exist in the late 80s, early 90s at all. And Kyle's generation, I admire them so much because they've got a fantastic future in front of them. I think much more excited than mine, and I just hope that they grab every opportunity that's there in front of them. Because Kyle, you're saying you are, but I hope other people of your age group feel that they can grab those opportunities, because things have moved on dramatically over the past 30 years in my experience, and they will continue. But I think if you look at when I was 16, men couldn't get married. There was there wasn't any of that. And we live in one of the most progressive countries in Europe. Scotland is one of the most progressive countries for equalities. Not the UK, but Scotland is one of the most progressive countries for equalities. And we should be really proud to be members of the Scottish community, because we have been fortunate to be in Scotland, because like how you're pointing out earlier, there's plenty of countries around the world where you get killed for being who you are, and that is not on. So yeah, we need more positive role models, definitely, but I think, Carol, it's up to your generation now to try and bring more positive role models forward for the next generation. So
yeah, I think you're absolutely right, Ian, because even so I'm now in my early 30s, and role models again when I was growing up, I can think of a lot of actors, because it was accepted almost in the acting community that you could be part of the community. But when I was growing up, politicians seemed to be the first ones who started to come out. Because, if you look at, Ruth Davidson, Kezia Dugdale, my own MP, David Cairns, was an out gay man. And there's now an MSP in the west of Scotland who was a few years older than me in school, and we were in the same circles. And he was always very open about who he is. And that was always a kind of, oh right, okay, they're just being themselves, okay. And because I am really into politics, seeing those figures who don't mind being who they were role models for me, I would say. And I think that one of the things that is going to be very helpful is if we do start to see more sports personalities coming out. We had the Blackpool footballer who's recently come out, Dame Kelly Holmes has come out, so these kind of big profile sports personalities, that seems to be the arena that we still don't have an awful lot of role models in, unfortunately. And if we can get more in there, then I think that more people will be able to be who they are. And if they want to follow in Tom Daly's footsteps and whether they're at the Olympics, then by all means do that. And I think that the more that we get people can then identify and go, oh, they can do that, well, so can I think will just be all the more helpful. Just before we bring our webinar to a close, one of the things I did want to talk about was the idea of a straight ally. We've talked a lot about role models and leadership, etc. Kyle, see if I can come to you first on this. How can people be a straight ally?
Many ways, and again, simple ways. You have to, I think, always be open to learning and listening and educating yourself, particularly educating yourself, because we're not just walking, talking dictionaries. Believe it or not, we don't actually know everything about the LGBTQ plus community. Some people are more educated than others, yes. Some people know nothing. But I believe it's up to you yourself to go away and learn what you have to learn. And even simple things like, knowing that you have a privilege. I think people often forget that. And, it doesn't mean that we're saying you've never had a struggle in your life. It's not saying that, there's never been any knockbacks and you've never had to deal with any sort of negativity. But you have to also realise and accept that you'll never experience the sort of negativity that the queer community do experience. And you have to be able to sort of understand or at least try and understand how it feels to be part of such a marginalized community. But again, I think the priority would be about, keeping yourself educated and, that want to learn, because if you don't want to learn, you're not going to know anything, and you're never going to have the ability to, probably speak to someone without somewhat offending someone, when that can easily be, avoided if it's something as simple as, like knowing the correct terminology or whatever it is. But I think you definitely have to be willing and open to do that.
Thanks, Kyle. Ian, how can people be a straight ally?
Couldn't agree more with Kyle. It's about ask the questions. There's absolutely nothing wrong with being informed. If you're not informed, you then don't know why certain things exist or what. Let's talk about your common interests. When I was thinking about this article, I was thinking about even simple things, like think about where you spend your money. So, one of the things that I stopped drinking a certain lager because it decided it didn't want to be associated as a gay beer back in the 1990s, because the TV program Queer as Folk was launched, and their adverts were in between the first 3 episodes of Queer as Folk, and that beer producer decided that they didn't want to be associated as a gay drink. So I've never touched that drink since then. So there is some of that stuff, but it's not just around being engaged. It's think about how do you spend your money and what's the knock-on effect of spending that money on certain companies, organisations. What are their ethics and practice, and that's not just being a straight ally for the LGBTQ plus community. It's for all communities. You should really think about where do you spend your money and what's the knock-on effect of that. And ethical purchases are really, really important. So I think we should do more on that, probably at our organisation, to try and inform staff about more ethical purchases. It was being a straight ally. You talk about your common interest. It doesn't just have to be about being part of the LGBT. I can't say that word. I'm getting tired now. It doesn't just have to be about that. It's like we've got other interests. That doesn't define who we are. So actually talk about your common interests and look at the benefits and the bonds and connections that you have together. So it's not, it's about friendship and being working together and being close together as well. So I'm going to stop waffling.
I think another thing to just quickly add in there as well is you have to be willing to stand up for the community, even if we're not there, even if there's not someone around to be offended. If you hear something offensive, stand up and say that it's offensive. Turn around to your friend and say you can't say that. Like, there's absolutely nothing wrong, and if anything, just do it. Like, because that's how we stop this. If it's not just coming from the LGBTQ plus community, but it's coming from everyone, people are going to very quickly realize, oh, okay, maybe I should stop using that language, or maybe I should stop saying this or stop doing that. And you have to be willing to also stand up and make some noise when someone's doing something wrong as well.
Yeah, absolutely, and that's what I was going to say is Stonewall have had a campaign for a good number of years now called No Bystanders, and for me that's exactly it. That is how you be any kind of ally. It doesn't matter whether you are an ally to LGBTQIA plus, whether you're an ally to the BAME community, to women. It doesn't matter. Don't be a bystander. If you see something that you don't that is offensive, you don't agree with, then back to what you were saying, Kyle. You educate them, and go, actually, not just you can't say that anymore, and sometimes people do make mistakes, and that's okay. And as long as that they are given that self-awareness to be able to go, all right, no, I can't say that anymore. So yeah, no bystanders would be how be the advice that I would give. So that is us now at an end for our Pride webinar. Can I just thank you both very much for being so candid and open and honest about your own journey and the things that you've dealt with and the advice that you've had for the people who have been watching our webinar. And to those of you who have been watching the webinar, thank you very much for joining in this celebration of Pride for West College Scotland. And if you see us on Saturday, then please come and say hello. We are always excited to hear from those who are part of the community or who are allies. So thank you very much.